we have another distinguished guest. This is such a cavalcade of stars here today. Roberta Metsola is with us here today. She is the President of the European Parliament. She will make some remarks to you now.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me here today. The future of global democracy is a theme that may have seemed almost abstract a few months ago. Democracy is an issue that so many of us have taken for granted for so long that we were almost taken by surprise that there are those who still call it into question, who think, in fact, that there should not be a future for democracy at all. Mine is a last generation in the European Union and across the Atlantic to vaguely remember a world when democracy was under constant threat. Anyone younger than me only knows peace. And perhaps we did grow complacent, comfortable, with the idea that our way was here to stay. We take voting for who we like for granted. We take being able to read independent journalism for granted. We know that we can assemble, we can disagree, we can pursue our happiness, we can dissent, we can live and love as we choose without consequence. That is our way, and we are being called to stand up for those freedoms and values once again. Because if we do not, those who believe in a very, very different world, in a very different way, will. This debate took on a new reality on February 24th, when President Putin's tanks rolled into Ukraine. The world changed, and suddenly we realized that everything we took for granted was being brutally upended. Of course, the warning signs were there. The Baltics, Finland, Poland have been warning us for years. We saw what happened in Crimea, what they did to Navalny, how they tried to crush democracy in Belarus. And yet, when Putin's revisionist ideology was matched by his army, we let it be surprising. It should not have been surprising. And now Ukraine and its people are looking to Europe for support. They are looking to the United States. They are looking to the United Kingdom. They are looking to us to match our rhetoric, our values, with action. How we have responded to the invasion and how we must continue to respond is the litmus test of our values. The unity and resolve of our response has held. The defiance, the everyday acts of extraordinary heroism of the Ukrainian people has meant that Putin's three-day war is now entering day 106. Now, as we speak here, as we've just heard President Zelensky, Ukraine is still being invaded. Bombs are still killing indiscriminately. Women are still being raped. Children are being forcibly deported. Millions have fled and will continue to do so. The world's grain and cereal supply is being held at ransom while Russia fills its silos. Now, Europe, the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom have remained united in responding, in helping Ukraine with military, humanitarian, financial, and political aid. Our response has been pushed by our public. Public opinion has twisted, in a good way, politicians' arms and ensured that this cannot ever become another forgotten war. But my fear remains. What happens when the so-called CNN effect starts to fade? What happens when war fatigue could inevitably set in? when, as one Kiev-based journalist described it yesterday, the West grows bored of the war? When prices rise, are we ready to say that democracy is worth a cost? And this is when the real test of our resolve, of our leadership, will occur. That is when we will need to stand up, when it becomes far more comfortable to sit down. And that is why we must keep our focus on Ukraine, on the real, clear, and present danger that our entire way of life is in. So Europe must continue to show resolve. At the Charlemagne Prize last month, where Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya was awarded this prize, you will hear from her in a few minutes, last month, Helmut Diese put it ever so eloquently when he said, "The European Union does not need to conquer or destroy anyone in order to be and to remain itself. But it is now having to learn in deep and brutal distress how seriously jeopardized its values and achievements are, and how many people who are also striving for those values are dying or being robbed of their happiness." We must continue to help Ukraine, their fight, your fight for freedom, for democracy, for the values that bind us, is our fight. Now, democracy requires effort. Democracy deserves bravery, but ultimately democracy needs leadership. So we in the European Union must continue to strengthen our security and defense mechanisms. We need a new security framework in the European Union, one that complements rather than competes with NATO. And that means precisely putting our money where our mouth is. Sanctions are starting to bite, but we must go further. This must become too costly for Russia to continue. Ultimately, Putin is staring down the world, hoping that we will blink first. But we cannot do that. Our economic sacrifices today are an investment in our and in our children's ability to live in a free and democratic world. And we must disentangle ourselves from Russian energy. We also need to be prepared to support Ukraine beyond emergency help. Supporting Ukraine is also about investing in its reconstruction and in the reinforcement of its institutions. We will help Ukraine with ambitious reforms to maintain a real system of democratic governance with resilient, effective and accountable institutions. And this is not only about safeguarding Ukrainian democracy, but also about preserving European and global democracy too. On European ambitions, I get asked this by every journalist I meet. Ukraine is already part of our European family, but it is high time. But it is high time that it is also given the real opportunity to join our European project. This is about hope. This is about an acknowledgement of the price that Ukraine has been forced to pay. And it is as much about strengthening Europe as it is about strengthening Ukraine. So let me be clear, the European Parliament, which I have the honor and responsibility to preside, stands firmly behind Ukraine's bid to receive EU candidate status. Now, I'm a politician. I understand realpolitik. I understand the art of the possible. But I also understand that Putin did not stop in Crimea. he would not have stopped in Kiev. So while we will keep pushing for peace, it must be a real peace, a peace with liberty, a peace with dignity, a peace with justice, a peace with accountability. In Europe, we know the cost of appeasement. We know the weight of walls and iron curtains. We know that turning away is paid in lives crushed and generations lost. So this is our moment. This is Europe's time. How will history judge our actions? Will future generations read about the triumph of democracy over authoritarianism, of multilateralism over isolationism? I don't think so. That is up to us and the decisions that we take now. Thank you. Good timing. I kept the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Metsola.
Thank you.
You spoke about your fear of war fatigue and sanctions fatigue. Are you already seeing signs of it?
I have now, since the 24th of February, been in multiple meetings where I would never have thought, as I mentioned, that political leaders, rather than what would usually happen, that you take a decision and then go back home and try to explain it, and you have different versions of the explanation, that came because their citizens said, look, guys, I have a national parliament, I have political parties across the whole spectrum in my country, and I need to take this decision. And I'm here to make a leap that I thought I would never make. That has not stopped. That has not stopped. But the next couple of weeks are crucial. There is a need for us to step up our efforts to make sure that we do not hide behind technicalities, legalities, talk of saving face, and say this is where we rally behind our compatriots, our Ukrainian friends who are fighting our war. So I will make sure that there is no fatigue around the political table, but we'd also then need to make sure that you don't look away, and we have to work together on that.
You mentioned that public opinion has driven leadership in the direction that it's gone so far. The sanctions are going to bite. They're going to bite very hard. And so let me ask you again, if that public support erodes, isn't that going to have an impact on the political commitment?
Well, first of all, it has to have an impact on Russia. So the sanctions that have already been adopted are not fully being implemented. There are gaps that are being abused and exploited. So our role also is that when we say that democracy is priceless, we make sure that nobody exploits that behind our back. When you are right that you say our citizens have already started to feel the effect. You have discussions in parliaments, but also on a European level, how to counter that. Is our financing model something that we can sustain? Can we put more money not only in defense, but also in cushioning electricity bills that cannot be paid? What are we doing to make sure that millions that are at the brink of famine will not go hungry in the autumn? We are receiving reports of countries that tell us, I have 6 weeks left of supply. So we need to take the very difficult decisions today, which are also financial, in order to cushion the effect of our citizens when we are fighting this war together.
President Macron has said we must not humiliate Russia. What's your response to that?
I don't talk about humiliation. I talk about women and children who are being indiscriminately raped and killed. And that has to be our focus.
Do you want to expand on that? Is there more you'd like to say?
Because, as I said in my speech, I think we have, for too many years, thought that appeasement or face-saving will win wars. But when you say a war has to be won, at what cost? Is it when the gun is pointed in one direction? Is it at the cost of losing fundamental territorial integrity, sovereignty, that all our countries have fought for so long to preserve? Is it opening the door for one person to think that he can take land and people and liberate them, as he says? I will not enter the negotiation of what humiliation means in that conversation. I will not do that.
Do you think there is room for diplomacy here?
There is always room for diplomacy. There is always room to talk. There is always room to discuss an end to an unnecessary, unprovoked war. But there is also room to make sure that who commits a crime, because we talk a lot about the rule of law, is held accountable. So we also need to be prepared that when we rebuild Ukraine, we also hold war criminals to account without mercy.
President Macron has also suggested an alternative to EU membership, a sort of European community. Is that a viable option, in your opinion?
I think every country, first of all, the title or my introduction sentence will be every country that looks to Europe as its home should be able to find a home in Europe. If a country is fighting for our common values, and I know how, from personal experience, I come from a country that worked for decades, fought for decades to join the European Union, and was met at times with technical replies, filibustering, as we call it in the Anglo-Saxon world, excuses, when at the end of the day it was about political will. If we managed to connect Ukraine to our electricity grid within 3 days of the start of the war, if we managed to make sure that communications and digitally Ukraine has managed to communicate, even when I was there on my visit, uninterruptedly, when we have not been able to do that, even though we could have done that decades ago. If we have committed unprecedented amount of funds and military assistance, then that is a community I would look at in terms of making sure every country in its own path can go step by step to Europe. But what I would not do is create a parking place. What I would do is engage in every country that is ready to join the European Union, and when that time, that readiness is considered, no excuses are used.
President Metsola, thank you so much for your comments and for fielding these questions today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you
so much.